Our guest today was the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Programs from 2006 to 2018, has been involved at Texas A&M for a long, long time. Dr. Marty Lauder, how are you this morning?
I'm great. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. So let's jump straight into our icebreaker question. What is your favorite superpower?
I think my favorite superpower is Mighty Mouse.
Okay,
That's old. Do you remember Mighty Mouse?
Sure.
Yeah.
That's
when I was a kid.
Here I come to say that. Is that Mighty Mouse? To save the day?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, I was like Mighty Mouse because I'm very small. I'm only 4'10". And Mighty Mouse was pretty small, but he solved a lot of problems. He was very resourceful. And best of all, he could fly.
Yes. Now, what is your superpower? I'm going to cheat a little bit. We were talking about this off the air.
My superpower is that I can use my feet to do almost anything. But my stupid human trick is that I can write with my feet, cursive, and mirror image from right to left.
What inspired you to learn to do that?
First, I had learned to use my feet because I had polio when I was 3 years old.
Okay.
And at the time, both of my arms were paralyzed. I regained the use of my left arm to some extent, but I couldn't use my right arm at all. So because I was so young, I improvised and used my feet for everything. And the second thing was I had a brother who was a year younger, and I was in school learning to write, and I was always very competitive with him. And he said, when he was learning to write, he said, well, I can write too. And I said, yeah, but you can't write with your feet. And he said, I'll try. And I said, well, try to write backwards in cursive. He never did it. He never was able to do that.
I feel like I would have dropped out of that competition as well. So you had polio. You had lost the use of your hands, both hands, at that time. How did you? That must have felt at least at one point in your life. That must have felt tremendously unfair. Or did it? Did you feel like it was an opportunity even as a young child? I feel like kids sometimes don't necessarily take things like that way.
No, I think when you're 3 years old and it happens, because I can barely remember before that.
Right.
That's one of my earliest memories is being in the hospital. And so I don't remember what it was like to be able-bodied. I think it's a lot harder. I do know some people who had polio as teenagers and adults, and it was much harder for them.
I see.
Because when you're that small, when you're that young, you just cope.
This is just what it is.
You learn to do things different ways. Like I learned how to use my feet. And
to you, especially when you were young, did that feel like this sort of wonderful, not secret exactly, because people knew that you could do it, but did it feel like this was, in a way, this was the thing that made you special?
Well, it may be a little different, but I tried not to be different. And so it pushed me to do things that my parents wouldn't want me to do.
Such as?
Well, I used to, since I had a brother, I ran around with a lot of boys in the neighborhood because there weren't very many girls. And we had a vacant lot out behind us, and they would play soccer. And I was a heck of a soccer player.
I would think so.
And they worried, that I would fall down and get hurt. And so they were very protective of me. And I think that pushed me to be very much of a risk taker. And so I think in that sense, it was good for me because it pushed me to be several things that have been helpful to me in my career. And one is to be resilient. And because I did fall down a lot, and there were a lot of things I couldn't do. And that pushed me not only to be resilient, but to be creative and figure out how to do things differently, but still be able to do them. Like I scuba dive and fly fisher, and I use my feet to fish.
That's so impressive.
I cast a fly rod with my feet.
Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. I would love to see that sometime.
Well, it's on video on YouTube.
Well, there you go. We'll talk about that after the show. So let's talk about risk taking. Mm-hmm. You said that it pushed you. You felt like you were being protected, and that pushed you to want to take risks. Yeah. What do you think was the best example of how that helped you, either in your career or in your life outside your work?
Well, I think I became pretty fearless because I had a lot of success at taking risks, mm-hmm. And they were pretty calculated for the most part, but sometimes foolhardy. Mm-hmm. But one thing I always wanted to do is bungee jumping. That's still on my list of things to do, and I'd still like to skydive. That's on my bucket list too. But I think that by doing that, it gave me a lot of confidence that I could do anything I wanted to do.
Did you know that there's a way to warm up for skydiving?
Really?
You can do indoor skydiving.
Yeah, I've heard that. There's a place in Houston, I think.
There's one in Austin too. I think there's one in Dallas. There might be two in Dallas, but it's fun. Yeah. I've done it a couple of times, and I'm sure it's not exactly like the real thing, but
I would feel like Mighty Mouse flying.
There you go. Here you come to save the day. So let's talk a little bit about your work. Tell us about your past academic positions, accounting experiences. Tell us a little bit about you vocationally.
Well, I graduated from college in 1971 with a degree in accounting. How I got into accounting, it was by accident, but I couldn't get a job. I was in 1971. There weren't many women in accounting at all. In fact, I was the only one in a pretty large class of all men. Mm-hmm. And I graduated at the top of the class in the accounting department, and big 8 firms at that time. Now it's the big 4. Big 8 firms were recruiting at my school, and the interesting part of the recruiting process for me was that they would bring me in for an interview because I was at the top of the class, but then they would say things like, well, you really have great academics and you really have a passion for accounting, but there's a problem. And I'd go, okay, what? And they said, well, we start all of our new associates out as auditors. I said, that's fine with me. I like auditing, all right. And they said, but it requires travel. I said, I'm free to travel. And they said, but you'd be traveling with all men. And I said, I'm in a male-dominated profession. I kind of expected that. I get along well with men, and they said, well, it would be a problem for their wives because we don't have any women associates. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, okay. They said, and we'll sure put your resume over here and think seriously about you. But I never got a job in public accounting. And it wasn't illegal at that time to do that. That was before the 1974 act that disallowed discrimination against women because of their gender. So I went to work for a state agency which had an affirmative action plan. They were trying to hire women, and of course they were finding some good ones out of schools that couldn't get jobs in public accounting.
Right. So I'm thinking about all of the, little micro decisions that would lead to sexist things that happened in the past. And so they felt this was a decorum issue.
Yeah.
I feel like people have a lot more freedom in some ways that are explicit and some ways that are much more implicit. Mm-hmm. And in a way that is helping us move past. We've made a lot of progress, still have a lot of progress yet to make, but that's helping us move past things like this that lead to really sexist behaviors. And you can see how people got to a pretty bad place with what might have been good intentions. But I'm sorry that you had to deal with that one way or the other.
It made me stronger.
Mm-hmm. What do you think was the best thing that you got from dealing with that?
Well, as it turned out, the job that I did get was really good for me. Mm-hmm. And as that agency grew, I was able to grow within it and take on much more responsibility. And it made me work very hard to prove myself. Mm-hmm. And sometimes my students say, what do you attribute your success to? And I said, well, every job I've ever been in, I was kind of like an amoeba that spreads itself. Wherever there's an empty space, that amoeba spreads itself. And I like to stay busy, so I was good at my job. And when I finished whatever I had done, I generally went in and helped somebody else do their job. And it was just fun for me to learn things. I've always been a learner. Mm-hmm. And so I knew everybody else's job. And so I would gain tremendous institutional knowledge about things, and therefore I was able to make suggestions about how to do things better. And that moved me up all the time in every position I had. And it was very rewarding for me, too, that happened here. Right. I wasn't satisfied just to do what I was hired to do, which is teach accounting and do research.
Right. So how did you get to there? You were hired to teach accounting and do research. Well, connect those dots for us.
Yeah, I was teaching accounting and I was doing research. And I had some experiences with students that led me to believe that we needed to get more freshmen into the College of Business mm-hmm. in freshman classes. But at the time, we didn't have very many. They came over to the building for their basic accounting and basic management and things like that, but they never really were part of the college until they got to be juniors. And I was teaching juniors, and I felt like that they had developed some bad habits, and they didn't have much understanding of what business really was. And I thought, well, if I can get them as freshmen, this just shows how much hubris I have. If I could get them as freshmen, I could get them into the cult of the business school. I could indoctrinate them. So that led to me starting a freshman program, a freshman learning community for business students, just on my own.
What surprised you the most about how well it went, and what was the biggest unexpected challenge that you faced in implementing that?
Well, I think the biggest challenge was I didn't have any idea what I was doing, and I was making it up mm-hmm. from the very beginning. But I was lucky enough to start out with a small group of freshman honors students. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that the college needed somebody to put together a program for these honors students that had a new scholarship program. Mm-hmm. And the donor wanted some sort of a freshman experience. So I started with 30 really, really smart, talented kids.
Yes.
And I said, I have no idea what we're doing, but we're going to make it up as we go along, and you're going to help me do it. And they were all excited about that. They felt a great sense of responsibility.
Agency.
Yes. And so I said our theme is going to be core competencies of business people. And I'd already gotten an idea about what that was because there'd been a good book written that had interviewed literally hundreds of thousands of CEOs and HR people saying, what are the most important competencies of a college graduate that you're hiring? And it was in all fields, not just business, engineering, mm-hmm. whatever.
Sure.
And those competencies were communication, creativity, the ability to work in teams, the ability to solve problems, and things like that. They were what we call soft skills. And we weren't teaching any soft skills. We really thought that was the job of liberal arts in the core curriculum to do that. But I knew that our students weren't getting those soft skills. And then I interviewed all of the advisory committees for every department in the college. And I said, tell me what we're doing right and doing wrong. And we had a brainstorming session with all of those donors and employers. And they said, well, here's what you're doing right. If they're coming in as beginning accountants, they know accounting. They have the technical skills. And the marketing people said that, and the finance people said that, and so on. And I said, okay, that's a pretty short list. Now tell me what we're not doing and should be doing. And they said things like communication, working in teams, decision-making, creativity. Yes, we've heard that those are the core. I've read that those are the core competencies, and I said we sort of thought that somebody else was teaching those. And everybody mentioned communications, and I said, gosh, they take a communications class, they take English classes, and they said, well, they're not doing the job, and we really want you to do something about that. So we ended up doing a whole lot of things about communication and written communication, oral communication, and electronic communication. And I think we've improved the skills of our students a lot. But that was kind of what we were going to do in that freshman honors course. So I gave them an assignment each week to go out and find everything you can about communication in business, and then come back and we'll discuss what you found in the library or on the internet or whatever. And so we just put the course together by ourselves, and it was so much fun. And they were doing a lot of research, and they were using their creativity and using their communication skills to get to teach the rest of the class that I was facilitating. And at the end of it, they said, that was fun. What are we going to do in the spring semester? I said, look, I took this on pro bono. I am not doing anything in the spring semester. And they said, oh, please, 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 this is so good. We'll help you. And I said, and then they said, and also what you ought to do is give this to all the freshmen, not just the honors students. And I said, well, there's 900 of them and one of me, and I already have a full-time job. They thought about that for a minute, and they said, we could help you. And I knew of models in other schools that had started these freshman programs where they were using sophomores and juniors to be peer mentors to small groups in large freshman classes.
Right.
And I said, well, that might just be a possibility. So I'll give you another semester, and you'll do a business plan. And your business plan is to put together a freshman learning community where we have sophomores and juniors like yourself. You'll be the first ones. And we've got to find a way to fund it, because I'm not going to have you working for free. You're going to be working for me, and I'm going to pay you a stipend that'll go into your scholarship fund. And it was a business school. I wanted paid employees.
Of course. How did you end up getting it funded?
Well, that was a problem. And I said, you're going to have to figure that out. You're going to figure out a budget so that I can pay you each $500 a semester, which ended up working out to about 50 cents an hour pay for them. But they were glad to get it.
Sure.
And I said, here's how you do a business plan. So I went through it and told them about how are we going to market it, the logistics of registration, what size classroom we'll need, where these small groups will meet, how many people we can serve in the first year as the pilot, and how to get it funded. So they wrote a business plan. And I happened to be telling the head of the finance department about it one day. And I said, I'm really proud of these kids. They're writing a business plan to start this new course in the fall. And he said, that's great. We ought to be doing more of that with our students. He said, why don't you come into my next donor advisory board committee meeting and tell them about it? And I said, nah, I'm not coming. I'm going to send two of my best students in to tell them. And so I did, and I didn't go. And they told all about their business plan and about their budget. And somebody said, well, where are you going to get the money? And they said, we haven't gotten to that part yet. So when they left the room, the kids left the room, one of the donors said, well, I'm going to write them a check for $1,000. And I expect all of the rest of you in this room to do the same. And the guy next to him, it was all men, the guy next to him said, well, you cheapskate. They need $20,000, and no, they need $25,000. There's 10 of us in this room, so you write a check for $2,000, and then I'll write a check for $2,000, and we'll give them a $20,000 nest egg. And they did it. And the department head came to me after the meeting. He said, you're not going to believe this. He said, I just got $20,000 from those people. And a few minutes later, I texted, no, I didn't text in those days. I emailed all the students. I said, come in for an emergency meeting. I need to talk to you. And they came to my office, and I said, you just raised $20,000. They said, we didn't go in to raise any money. What are you talking about? And I said, they gave you $20,000 for a start. And then the accounting department, not to be outdone, said, well, they need, how much more do they need? And I said $5,000 to meet their budget. And so they gave $5,000. I should have said $20,000. Well, you know, stupid me, lowballed it. But the accounting and finance departments did that, and we got started. And we were going to take 50 students the first time, because I only had, I think, about 15 of those original students who could be peer mentors, peer leaders. And so we were going to take 50, and we had an internet registration system. It was outside the regular registration system, first come, first serve. Opened at 8 o'clock in the morning, and by 8:01 they had crashed the server because every freshman wanted in it. So the next year we took 200, and then we said, well, we might as well. We had a good pool of students who had already taken it by that time, so we could recruit enough peer leaders for small groups. And we wanted 2 for each group, a male and a female. So we ended up taking almost all 900 of the freshmen by the 3rd year.
Okay. And how big were the groups?
The groups vary depending on the size and how many peer leaders we can recruit. So they're usually no more than 15. We try to keep it close to 12 to 15.
Okay.
And the big class meets once a week with a professor, and then the small groups meet once a week. And they reinforce or do things. And we look for not only academic development. It's not a business 101 class. It's more of an introduction to the core competencies and social adjustment to college, because we felt like that we could improve our freshman retention rate. The whole university was trying to improve the freshman retention rate. And although ours was pretty good, we felt like we wanted to encourage more help more students stay. We found out that a lot of students freshmen don't persist into the sophomore year because of social maladjustment. They're just lost in a freshman class of 7,000 kids at a big university, and some of them have come from much smaller schools.
How much of that do you think can be addressed by faculty and staff, and how much of it is just inherent to that size of a transition in life?
Some of it can, we were trying to address it as faculty and staff, and we have very good professional advisors who try to help the students with their, but, there's the ratio of advisors to students is about 250 to 300 to 1. And so there's not much time, but when you have, we felt like that the fish camp model, are you familiar with that? Yeah. We felt like the fish camp model was really a very good model, where you have a small group that's led by some experienced students. And there are some things that only students can tell other students. The best places to go in the library, the quiet places, how to do your planner, and generally, professors who are advising and professional advisors don't have time to talk about those things. and there's a lot of things that students will tell other students, and the freshmen believe the students. They don't necessarily believe me or an advisor when I tell them. So I find that a good way to get the message across to freshmen and any student actually is to have another student do it for us.
It's amazing. Sometimes you'll give the same person the same advice 5 different times.
Yes.
And then they will come back to you and tell you the same advice that they got from somewhere else.
Yeah.
They just had to hear it from a third party. At various times, you've held the Wiley Professorship in Business, the Presidential Teaching Professorship, and the Regents Professorship. What was unique or different about your teaching style specifically? It sounds like getting the students involved in the leadership process and the development process was something that you did, at least for this program. But was there anything or anyone else that you tried to emulate? Anything you tried to stay away from?
Well, the Wiley Professorship was just part of being the Associate Dean, and that was just as long as I was Associate Dean. The Presidential Professorship and the Regents Professorship were for teaching and engagement of students and creativity and programming, and those are lifetime titles. So I carry those with me forever, and I'm very proud of them. And they are for a combination of things, not only good teaching in the classroom, but also innovation and putting together things that weren't there before.
How did you do that? In what ways did you innovate in the classroom?
Well, I'm not sure I innovated so much in the classroom as I did outside the classroom in the college. Okay. Although I do work very hard in my classroom to figure out new ways to do things. And I read a lot about learning, and I adopt those ideas in my classes. And one thing I found very interesting, I used to spend in the first part of my career, I spent a lot of time over at the Center for Teaching Excellence because I was pretty good when I started, but I wanted to be better, and I was teaching intermediate accounting, which is a nightmare of a course. And I could tell that my students were just so afraid. They're afraid of that class. Mm-hmm. They were afraid of me. And I did all the wrong things at the beginning of class. I thought I wanted to be very honest with them. So I'd come in and I'd say, look, I want to help you get through this class, but I got to tell you, this is probably the hardest class that you'll ever take. And, you know, about 40% of you will end up dropping or not passing the course. And so I thought I was going to motivate them, but you don't motivate through fear. And someone at the Center for Teaching Excellence says, do you know what in surveys of students, what they care the most about, what they want the most from their professor in college? And I said, yes, they want competence, organization, intelligence, honesty, fairness. And she said, wrong. They want to know that their professor cares about them as an individual. And I took that message, and the next semester, instead of talking about the syllabus and how impossible the class was, I was in a nice U-shaped classroom. We had just moved into this building, and there's a big area out between the lectern and the desks. And I said, everybody get out of your seat and come down here and sit on the floor. And I sat on the floor with them, and I said, let's just pretend we're in my living room and we're getting to know each other. And you can ask me any question you want, but it can't be about the syllabus, and it can't be about the exams or the grade distribution or anything like that. No boring stuff.
What was the best question that you got that day?
Well, I got a lot of questions, but they were mostly like, are you married? What does your husband do? Do you have any kids? How old are they? Do you have any pets? What do you do for fun? Where are you from? Where did you go to college? Just all kinds of personal questions. And I was really astounded. I was, pretty new teacher at the time, and I had no idea that they wanted to know me personally. Mm-hmm. Having been in school in the late 60s, we didn't care if our professors knew us, or knew our names, or knew anything about us. We certainly didn't want to know anything about them because they were the enemy. I was at UT in 1968, and we didn't ever go to class. We just marched on the administration building, and protested the war. It was, they were the evil. And so it was so different to me to have this group of students that, kind of wanted a surrogate mom and dad in the classroom. And it was very shocking to me and kind of hard for me to do. But
do you think that your gender actually helped you in that respect at a time when people were not used to getting to know their professors? You said that the first question they asked you was, are you married? Mm-hmm. Do you have any kids? Mm-hmm. Do you think that being a woman helped make you in some way more approachable in that moment?
I think that's a possibility. I think that they're probably mostly used to having women teachers in high school and junior high and elementary school, and I think that they probably feel a woman is more approachable, more willing to answer those kind of personal questions.
I see.
Than a man, but they were also intimidated by me. I would get a lot of that on my teaching evaluations, and I asked my husband one day. I said, "Why do you think my students are intimidated by me? I'm really pretty kind to them. I give them hard tests and make them cry on the test, but I'm not really an intimidating person in the classroom." And he said, "Marty, you struggle to listen. I'm not a good oral learner." And so when somebody is trying to ask me a question in class and they're asking it very poorly because they don't understand it, I kind of get up in their face. He pointed this out. And because I have bifocals, I'll lean forward.
You go over the glasses.
Because I'm up here.
Right.
I go over the glasses, and I'm frowning because I'm concentrating so hard. He said, "Look in the mirror with that face and tell me if that's not intimidating." Uh-huh. And I said, "Oh, my gosh, I got to stop doing that."
Right. So then what did you do instead of that? Same scenario, students asking the exact same question. They're asking it very poorly. So what do you do now?
Well, I actually warned them beforehand. I said, "I have a habit of wrinkling my brow, looking over my glasses at you, and you will think it's anger and disapproval, but it's not. I'm just trying so hard to understand exactly what you're asking so I can answer your question."
Okay.
And so I said, I'll try to smile and frown at the same time. So I try to just laugh more in class and smile more in class and make sure if I'm doing this that I stop doing it.
So in what ways do your students challenge you the most, even up to recently, up to now? Like what are the hardest things that they get you with? Not that they're trying to trap you or anything like that, but what are the biggest challenges of classroom learning in 2019?
For all the time that I was in the dean's office, we only teach one class as associate deans, and I taught this freshman honors class that I've been teaching since back in 1999. And of course, honor students, we're in a small class, and we do lots of interactive things, and they're kind of wild and crazy and chaotic, and I like that in a class. I like chaos. And we talk about a lot of interesting things. So they're real engaged in the class, and they like to challenge me with ideas. And when I went back to teaching intermediate this fall, I was really sad and surprised that my accounting students, and they're about half finance majors and half accounting majors, that I had the hardest time engaging with them. And they sit very silently and very passively. I thought, well, maybe it's because I'd tried all my techniques, of talking about myself and, tell them, go watch my fly fishing video, that's really cool. And
Right.
a lot of the guys fish, fly fishing.
Mm-hmm.
So
Probably not with
no,
their
I don't
feet, though.
sit on the floor anymore because I'm almost 70 and I can get down, but I can't get up without help. But that probably would endear me to them if they had to help the old lady up from the floor.
Perhaps.
I remember one day I was teaching class back in the old days, and we wore hose that were called thigh highs, that just came up and my elastic was giving out, and I was standing there in front of the class lecturing, pacing up and down, and all of a sudden, my hose were down around my knees, and I, instead of being embarrassed about it, I just broke out in laughter, and I laughed until I was crying, and they were all laughing, and I said, you just don't see that very often in an accounting class, when the professor loses her underwear.
True enough.
So,
but whose hose hasn't fallen down around their knees at one time or
really? It
another?
happens to everybody all the time.
So let's talk about chaos. You said the word chaos a few minutes ago. You said a chaotic learning experience is something you enjoy. What makes a positive chaotic learning experience for you?
Well, I mean chaos in the sense that everybody's excited and they're all wanting to talk at once and they're very engaged in the subject. And that's difficult to handle as a professor, but because you've got to, maintain a level of manageable chaos. But some professors are really scared of that. They want their class to be more orderly. But I kind of thrive on that because I see the excitement in it. And that's where I get my kicks, is when I see the light bulbs coming on in the students' heads and the excitement of wide eyes and yakking and, carrying on and talking to each other.
Sure.
It's not just socializing. They're talking about ideas. And I want them to stretch themselves by talking about ideas, not talking about people.
Ah, yes.
And they only talk about people. All they do is text and email, and that's a really bad trend. I'll be glad to talk about that if you want me to.
Let's do it then.
All
Please.
I'm troubled by the fact that I'm not the only one. They're not the only ones. I have found that in the last, say, 10 years, since iPhone was 2007, since I am loaded up with mobile devices, all of which have social media on it, although
Sure.
I got on Twitter and said, no, I'm not going to do that. So I don't tweet. But just having my email that is open on my computer popping up and telling me I have a message.
Dopamine shot.
My iPhone sitting there, and it's notifying me that I have text messages from family members. All of the numerous interruptions. And, I've been reading a lot about it lately, and the neuroscience of it is showing, and also just some empirical research is showing, that we are ruining our brains. I
can feel John Krychek sitting right here.
Does he say that?
Oh, yes, very much so.
We are, and he's big on meditation and
mindfulness, attentiveness.
And, yes, attentiveness. And I find the attention span of my students and my own attention span shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. I have trouble reading a book because I distract myself if something else doesn't distract me. And it's because I'm so accustomed now to always stopping what I'm doing and looking at that email to see if it's something I need to read when the little box pops up. And I really need to unplug. I need to turn off my email and do what a lot of people do, is open that email at 10 o'clock, get the stuff out of it, close it, open it again at 1 o'clock, and not let that email just take over my life, because I get probably 100 to 120 emails a day, a lot of them spam, but they all pop up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see my attention span shrinking, and I know part of that is just because of my advanced age, but a lot of it I've been noticing has happened just because I'm so distracted by everything around me. And it's hard for me to be in the moment, as John Krychek says.
Sure.
So
let me play devil's advocate for a moment and let the record show I agree with you. But let me push back a little bit. Just I think it'll create some interesting discussion. I feel like our brains have kind of always been this way, and now the world, the technological wonder that we live in, is now better able to leverage that innate attention span issue with our brains, and business has optimized now on, we're going to get your attention for 15 seconds at a time or 5 seconds at a time. You may have noticed, I've noticed YouTube ads are getting shorter, and there are more of them. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm wondering about is, I think the best way to approach the issues that you're talking about is by doing exactly the things that you're talking about doing. Is we have to take action to compartmentalize these forces in our lives. Mm-hmm. But if we do that effectively, I think that we are more effective as people than we were 10 years ago, despite the fact that there are all these forces pushing in on us and trying to distract us. What do you think about that?
I think you're absolutely right. And, I think that probably in prehistory that our brains were like that. We were always under attack, under threat.
That's a good plan.
And so, being aware of everything, every movement, and paying attention to what's going on, and being fragmented in our thinking, that was probably a good thing for us to be able to do that. But I think what we've done now is that, this article was in the New York Times a few weeks ago, is that we've lost our ability to focus on one thing that's very, very difficult. And that's why I said it's hard for me to even read a book, particularly a difficult book. If I pick up a sci-fi novel, that's pretty easy to get involved in. But if I am trying to read a book that's more technical or more difficult to read, I can't stay with it, and I drift away and think of maybe I've got some email on it. It's really hard for me to do that. Mm-hmm. So when I talk to my students, I think that they probably have a lot of trouble focusing. And accounting, intermediate accounting especially, is something that you need to sit down and spend uninterrupted time thinking about it, and thinking about it really hard, and using your analytical skills. And if you don't devote your entire attention to that get in the zone. I mean, Michael Jordan didn't shoot all those basketball hoops because he wasn't concentrating and focusing. You got to get in that zone. Mm-hmm. And I think it's hard for students to get in that zone, that thinking zone.
One of the things, I agree with you. One of the things that helped me the most in my MBA experience was figuring out the right way to frame the learning. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was problem sets that really helped me, specifically with accounting. Mm-hmm. I couldn't just read the chapters. Mm-hmm. I didn't learn that way. I could do it, but my retention rate was very low. Yeah. And so thankfully, Professor Reese allowed me and a couple of other students to put together problem sets and then distribute those to the class. And the process of actually putting it together, of choosing, all right, we're going to do this problem, right, not that one, because we already have that over here. of choosing which ones we were going to solve actually helped the learning process. And then going back through it also helped me again. So I'm a very kinesthetic learner. And I think we have to be, in order to get back to the place that you're talking about, where we're really getting in the zone and our level of engagement is sufficient to where it's not overwhelming, but we're sort of up playing at the level we need to be playing at to stay engaged for a long period of time. I think people really have to be the captains of their own ships in terms of figuring out, okay, what is it that gets me into exactly that brain space? And encouraging people to think about that and say, okay, what gets you into the zone? What are the steps that you need to take? Because it doesn't happen by magic. I think that is part of how we overcome a world of distraction.
I agree.
So let's shift gears. And as we start to bring this to a close, we talk all the time about the value of the Aggie Network. What does the Aggie Network mean to you at this point in your career?
The Aggie Network has always been a great help to me because the whole business school does this, but, we really depend on our alumni, our business alumni. And they give us great feedback. And that really was, early in my career, that was really, that hit me hard when I decided to have these focus groups with the permission of the department heads in every department about how interested they were in what we were doing and how eager they were to be asked their advice about what we're doing in the classroom.
Everybody loves to give their opinion.
Yeah, and they gave me great information.
Sure.
They didn't hold back.
I bet not.
And it was, almost the same story in every single one of the department development council meetings is they said exactly the same thing. And so it was very easy to compile all that brainstorming data that we did on whiteboards and come up with our core competencies that we decided to use, which incidentally, if you go over to engineering and say, what are your core competencies? They'll say, oh, well, it's the same as business. Because it's the same in every workplace.
Because you have to have the soft skills.
And we don't call them soft skills anymore. We call them critical competencies.
Oh, okay.
Because that's the way the employers feel about them.
That's what life is.
Yes.
What advice would you give to students starting out and I think I might be able to spoil the ending here, but I'll let you tell it. What advice would you give to students starting out in the finance or accounting professional world, or maybe just the professional world in general?
Be humble.
Oh, okay.
You're not near as smart as you think you are. You have a lot to learn. I know that I talk to my counterpart, associate dean at the University of Texas all the time, and I said, "What's the difference between our students?" And he said, "Nothing. They all come from the same high schools, and some of them just like orange, and some of them like maroon. But there is one big difference that I can't stand." And I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Oh, they go out there and they're mad because they don't get the corner office in their first job. And Aggies have a much better work ethic, And so I'd say to our students, keep that up. That's what employers like. They don't want you to come in and put your feet on the desk, which some of our interns do. So be humble. You don't know everything. Second, be resilient. You will fall on your face. You will make mistakes. You will screw up. But take it as constructive criticism. Don't get mad when somebody corrects your work, because they will. And be an amoeba. Yes.
Let's move to some rapid fire. As quickly as you can, what is one new thing that you learned in the past week?
I learned that you need to take advantage of every moment with the people around you who you care about, because they might not be there tomorrow.
Okay. What are 3 qualities, and you can't say humility, that you strive to have and embody?
Myself?
Yes.
Courage.
Okay.
Truthfulness.
Okay.
Kindness.
Good.
I have to work at all those.
We probably all do. I certainly do. What do you consider your most valuable failure? just as briefly as possible.
I think it was when I couldn't get a job when I first got out of college.
Okay.
I knew I was real smart. I thought I should have, everybody should want me.
Well, to be fair, there were some other things that you were dealing with. It wasn't necessarily a level playing field. What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
They think I'm cold.
No.
And I'm not. I'm just reserved.
Fair enough.
But they think I'm more, not. I'm not an extrovert at all. I'm an introvert. I'm quiet, and like they take that as being cold.
Yeah. If you could have anyone as a mentor, living or dead, for one day, but just a day, who would it be?
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Oh, good choice. What is your fondest memory of TAMU?
I think it was the day I interviewed here.
Oh, yeah?
It was my fondest memory. Okay. I did not want to come here. Oh. I came here because my thesis advisor told me that he had already said I would come for an interview. And you don't say no to your thesis advisor.
No.
And I didn't want to go back to Texas. I wanted to live in another state. I wanted to live in a big city instead of a small town. I wanted to be on the seacoast. And because I had never lived those things before.
Right.
And after the first day of interviews, I went back to the hotel. My husband said, "Was it as bad as you thought it would be?" And I said, "Well, actually, if they make me an offer in the morning, and I think they will, I'm going to accept it." He said, "I think that'd be a great decision." And we've been here 30 years.
Here we are. Here we are. We end each session with some good bull. This is an opportunity to recognize someone else for something great they have done. Do you have someone you would like to send some good bull?
Yeah, and I hate to do this because she's in the room, but I'd like to do it for Shannon Deere. And the reason...
Shannon's always a good choice.
...is she gets lots of awards and accolades. She's probably really big-headed, but I love her dearly, and I love her not just because she's one of the smartest people I've ever seen. She can keep about 25 ideas in her brain all at the same time and bounce them around and make something out of it. She remembers everything, which I admire a lot. She is, but what I love most about her is she is a great teacher, and she shares everything. She shares more than anybody. Out in the real world and in academia, when people create things, they don't always share their ideas. They don't share all the details of their ideas. They just share how successful their idea was. Shannon has left the accounting department a huge legacy of teaching materials and teaching techniques. And when I first started, she said, "Oh, here, I'll give you everything I've got." And she does that to everybody that comes into the department. She gives them everything. And that kind of sharing and collegiality is what we all ought to emulate all the time.
She's a good one. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We will catch you on the outro. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to stay up to date on our latest videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. If you're in a rush or on the road, you can still join us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to learn more about us or our guests, please visit our website at mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Also, please check out Mays Business School's academic programs. They're the sponsors of our show, and you can find them in the description. Thanks, and gig 'em.